My fork hadn't even touched the slice of turkey when Lila, my 10-year-old granddaughter, slipped to my side like a shadow and pressed a small folded napkin into my hand. Her little hand was ice cold and trembling so hard I could feel it through the fabric. When I opened it under the table, I almost dropped my fork. "You need to leave right now. Pretend you're sick. They're waiting to do something to you." I looked up. Lila's face was pale, her eyes wide, as if she had just seen something no child should ever witness. Around the table, laughter rose. Too loud, too forced. The warm yellow light made my daughter-in-law, Marissa's, face look radiant, but that glow felt more like makeup than genuine joy. Daniel kept pouring wine, never looking at anyone for more than a second. In the kitchen, on the marble counter, a thick stack of documents lay face down, the corner of the paper sticking out as if someone had tried too hard to hide it. My chest tightened. A wave of dread swept through me, sharp, cold, unmistakable. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I realized that if I didn't get up at that very moment, my entire life might soon be decided by someone else. I'm Eleanor Ward, 72 years old, living alone in Maple Ridge. In this small town, everyone knows everyone, and where my wooden house has stood for 38 years, it has become woven into my life like a memory that refuses to fade. I'm small, I stroll, and sometimes I need to hold the handrail when climbing the steps, things that make people assume I'm fragile or confused, the way they often label the elderly. But one thing I've always known, I'm not young anymore, but I'm not easily controlled. If from the very first seconds you felt something was off, you can follow the channel and stay with me throughout this story. Just minutes after that moment, what happened would make anyone question the meaning of the word family. I placed a hand on my chest, trying to make the gesture look natural. "I feel a little dizzy," I said softly, but loud enough for the table to hear. Since the second Lila handed me that napkin, my face had felt numb. I stood up slowly, careful not to draw attention, though inside my heart was pounding as if trying to break through my ribs. Daniel immediately turned toward me, a flicker of concern appearing, just a flicker, before vanishing as quickly as it came. He pulled his mouth into an awkward smile that hurt just to look at. "Are you sure, Mom? Maybe sit a bit longer?" "We just started dinner." His voice sounded friendly but empty, like a line rehearsed beforehand. "I know, Daniel. I know which expressions are genuine and which ones are for show. That smile wasn't for me. It was meant to reassure someone watching from the other side of the table." Before I could respond, Lila shot up from her seat so fast her chair scraped backward. "I'll take Grandma outside," Lila said, grabbing my arm before anyone had time to react. Her voice was small but tight, stretched like a violin string on the verge of snapping. Marissa raised an eyebrow and set her wineglass on the table with a sharp clink. A tiny sound, but it cut like a thin blade. "Lila, sit down. The adults are talking. You don't need—" "I'm going with Grandma." Lila interrupted, not loud but startlingly firm. She looked straight at her mother, not defiant. More like pleading. I had never seen that look in the child I always thought of as carefree and innocent. That look told me this was no simple matter. Daniel shifted in his seat, avoiding my eyes. Marissa's glance flicked toward the kitchen, where the face-down documents lay in that strange, deliberate way. That tiny gesture was enough to confirm Lila wasn't imagining anything. The room suddenly felt dense. The clinking of silverware, the dishes, the forced laughter, they layered over one another but didn't blend. It felt as if my family were all acting in the same play, but each person had learned a different script, causing every moment to twist out of rhythm. Someone from the in-law side laughed loudly, trying to pull the dinner back on track, but the laugh drifted into empty space, touching no one. The overhead light trembled slightly, casting shaky reflections on everyone's faces, exposing expressions that looked off, strained, evasive, pretending to be natural while being anything but. Lila tugged my hand again. "Grandma, let's go outside for a moment," she whispered, her voice barely audible but her hand cold and slick with sweat. I looked around the table, faces I once believed were family, blood, the people I trusted. Everything now seemed coated in a hazy film, familiar shapes but warped, distant, hiding something behind them. In that moment, I knew only one thing. I had to stand up. I had to walk away from that table, that room, those eyes waiting for me to follow the script they had prepared. And I followed Lila, the first step away from something I couldn't yet name, but my instincts recognized all too clearly. The cold wind swept across the porch, lifting my thin hair. Lila pulled me into a shadowed corner beneath the old porch light, where the weak yellow glow barely lit her pale face. Her small fingers gripped my hand so tightly I could feel each trembling knuckle. "Lila, tell me what's going on." I leaned down, trying to keep my voice steady even as my heart hammered. She swallowed, her eyes wide with the fear of a child who knows too much for her age. "Grandma." I heard Mom and Dad talking in the kitchen before everyone sat down. I listened to every word, my breath suspended in the chilly air. They said, "Tonight you're being moved to Sun Valley Care Residence." Her voice shook when she said the name, a nursing home 10 miles from town where people sent elders who had no one left to care for them. They said you're not lucid anymore, that you forget things, that you shouldn't be living alone. I gripped the wooden railing to keep my balance, not because of the cold, because each word peeled back pieces of a picture I never wanted to see. Lila went on, her voice so faint I had to lean closer. "Mom told Grandma and Grandpa that they already prepared the papers, and the notary is on the way. After dessert, they'll take you to the study and—" Her voice broke, her eyes glistening. I cupped her cheek and gently brushed aside the strand of hair stuck to her forehead. "It's all right, sweetheart, tell me." Lila took a breath, trying to steady herself like an adult. "They said even if you refuse, they'll find a way to make you sign, because if you don't sign now, it'll be harder later. And Mom said, no matter what, it has to be done tonight." The cheerful noise from the dinner table drifted out to us like it came from another world, a world I no longer belonged to. Lila looked up at me, lips pressed tight, then whispered the last sentence that sent a chill deep into my bones. I heard them say, "Tonight they'll do whatever it takes to make you sign." I stood under the porch, listening to Lila, and in that moment, every scattered bit of memory from the past few weeks suddenly aligned with terrifying clarity. Things I had brushed aside, things I had mistaken for clumsy concern for my children, now all pointed in one direction, and that direction did not include me. Daniel, my son, had sighed too often during his recent visits. When I asked, he would just smile and say, "Don't worry, Mom, just work stuff." But that day, I heard him talking on the phone outside. If they cut any more hours, we're not going to be able to keep up with the mortgage. His voice was tight, strained. I was in the kitchen washing vegetables, but my heart clenched. And Marissa, every time she came over, she would complain about the rising interest on their long-term loan. If rates keep going up like this, we won't survive. I thought it was simply their household trouble, something a mother didn't need to meddle in. Now, looking back, those words feel like stepping stones in a plan they had been quietly laying out. Then I remembered the health check at Dr. Halper's clinic. Marissa insisted on going with me, said it was better to have someone drive me. I didn't question it. I thought she was being kind. But once inside, the doctor began asking odd questions. "Do you remember what day it is? Can you count backward from 50? Who do you live with? Do you forget things often?" I answered everything clearly, but when I glanced over, Marissa stood behind me with her lips slightly curved. Not a happy smile, more like someone ticking boxes on their own checklist. I told myself then, the doctor was just doing his job, but now I know the appointment wasn't for my health, it was for their paperwork. One stormy night, Daniel and Marissa showed up at my door with 2 takeout boxes and a stack of insurance documents. Rain still clung to their hair. Daniel spoke as if trying to sound gentle. "Mom, can you help us by signing the section for emergency contacts?" "Just routine stuff." I held the papers and flipped through them. Most sections were about power of attorney, asset management, and beneficiary information. "Why are these here?" I asked. Daniel immediately looked flustered. Marissa cut in quickly. "Don't worry, this is just the full packet. They included extra pages. You only need to sign where we marked." When I said I wanted to read everything carefully, Daniel glanced at Marissa. Worry so obvious I had to pretend not to notice. It was stormy that night. I thought they were just in a rush. Now I know that wasn't haste. It was the impatience of people trying to finalize a plan not yet fully polished. And then the phone call from the insurance company 3 weeks ago. A strange woman's voice asking, "Mrs. Eleanor Ward, have you agreed to allow a relative to manage your asset records?" I froze for a few seconds, then asked, "I never agreed to that. Who said I did?" The woman quickly replied, "Oh, sorry, there must be a mistake," and hung up before I could say another word. At the time, I was only puzzled. Now the memory makes my skin crawl. All those harmless fragments had now formed a picture so clear, so dark, that even the porch light couldn't soften it. And I understood. Everything had started long ago. I was simply the last to realize it. After walking Lila back to Daniel's house and driving home, I felt like I had stepped out of a smoke-filled room, my head spinning, yet every sense painfully sharp. I opened my front door and turned on the living room light. The familiar golden glow filled the room, but that night it didn't feel warm. It illuminated every object I'd lived with for decades, and the truth I had just been forced to face. The cup of tea I'd made before leaving sat untouched, cold. I sank into my husband's old armchair, the one with the worn armrests from all the tapping he used to do while reading the newspaper. Sitting down, I could almost hear the rustle of his pages, his voice urging me not to worry so much, reminding me, "You're always stronger than you think." I looked around the room. The scratch on the wall corner from when Daniel crashed his toy car into it as a boy. The lamp with the scorched wooden base was a result of my clumsy mistake the first year we moved in. The front door frame is slightly crooked because my husband attempted to fix it, but never quite got it right. The curtains faded on one side from 38 summers of sunlight. Every mark told the story of my family and of me. Yet someone had tried to decide my future on Thanksgiving night, with a few face-down papers and a practiced smile. I pulled my old leather notebook from the drawer, the one I only used when I needed to think with absolute clarity. I wrote everything down: Marissa's words, Daniel's looks, my unease these past weeks, and Lila's trembling confession. Each word felt like an anchor, keeping me grounded and emotion from overwhelming reason. But then I stopped writing. I needed to speak to someone uninvolved, unentangled, and clear-minded enough to face the truth with me. I dialed Helen, the friend who had known me since Daniel was in diapers. The moment I heard her familiar, slow, "Hello," my eyes stung. "Helen, I think Daniel's family is hiding something from me. Something not right." Helen was silent for a few seconds, then asked in a quiet but razor-sharp voice, the kind only the seasoned possess, "What did he do?" I told her everything, every detail, no more, no less. The more I spoke, the more I heard the tremor in my own voice, anger and fear rising together, two emotions I hadn't felt at the same time in years. When I finished, Helen exhaled. "Eleanor, sometimes children stop seeing us with affection." She paused, weighing her words. "They see us in terms of assets." Her sentence wasn't a knife. It was truth laid bare, and truth always hurts in its own way. I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the wall clock tick. Then I nodded quietly, though Helen couldn't see it. "I understand." I set the phone down and straightened my back. I couldn't let anyone, not even my own child, decide for me. I had lived long enough to know that if you bow once, you bow for life. And in that moment, I knew I had to fight, not with anger, but with clarity, with preparation, with the very mind they assumed I no longer possessed. I would show them just how wrong they were. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not because I hadn't slept, but because my mind felt startlingly clear. After that night, I knew I couldn't afford to waste another minute. I took a sip of coffee, put on my sweater, and drove to Lakeside Community Bank, where I had entrusted nearly all my finances for years. Mr. Bennett, the branch manager, was speaking with a customer when he saw me. He recognized me immediately and smiled warmly. "Mrs. Ward, long time no see. Please, come into my office." I sat down in the familiar leather chair across from his desk. As soon as the door closed, I said plainly, "I need to increase the protection on my accounts, immediately." Mr. Bennett tilted his head, his expression shifting from friendly to serious. "Of course. But could you explain a bit more?" I told him the important parts, not the emotions, but the concrete actions Daniel and Marissa had taken. The papers they pushed me to sign, the strange health exam, the call from the insurance company, and Thanksgiving night. Bennett listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced. To be honest, I'm not surprised. I've worked in this field for over 20 years, and I've seen cases like this before. He lowered his voice. Situations where relatives try to take over a parent's assets. It happens more often than you'd think. Hearing that, a quiet sadness rose in me, not just for myself, but for all the older adults dismissed and underestimated. "So what do I need to do?" I asked. Mr. Bennett opened a drawer and pulled out a packet. "We'll activate advanced authentication. Every transaction, transfers, profile changes, anything, will require you to be present in person, along with an identification code only you know. Even if someone comes in with a legal power of attorney, they won't be able to touch your accounts." "Good," I said, barely hiding my relief. "Please set it up right away." Once everything was completed, Bennett handed me a business card. "This is the number for the state's elder protection specialist, in case you need additional support." I took it and thanked him, but my next step was already clear. That afternoon, I drove to the office of attorney Clara Martinez, a small suite on the second floor of a brick building near the town center. Clara was around 50, hair pulled back, eyes sharp but warm. She shook my hand, invited me to sit, and said, "Start from the beginning. There's no rush." I opened my leather notebook and showed her everything I had written. When I reached Lila's part, my voice faltered. Clara picked up her pen and nodded. "I'll need a direct statement from the girl. Could you ask her to write it down?" "I will." Clara flipped through each page, asked for a few more details, then said slowly, "Mrs. Ward, what you're describing is a textbook case of elder financial abuse, but to fully protect your assets, I recommend setting up a revocable living trust. That trust, what exactly does it do? Simply put, your house, your money, your other assets will be placed under a trust controlled solely by you. Even if someone obtains legal authority to act on your behalf, they still cannot access the assets inside the trust." I exhaled in relief. "Can we do it now? If you agree, I'll begin drafting it today." I nodded without hesitation. For the next 2 hours, we began building the file, verifying signatures, requesting copies of medical records, reviewing the insurance call, and gathering every piece of evidence. Clara worked quickly, clearly, decisively, like someone who had handled cases like mine 100 times before. When I stood to leave, Clara placed her hand on the file and said, "You're not alone in this, Eleanor, and I'll make sure they don't take anything that belongs to you." That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had regained part of the strength I'd lost. That afternoon, the sky turned gray and heavy, clouds hanging low like a warning. I was brewing a fresh pot of tea when I heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, I saw Daniel and Marissa step out, both dressed as if they were attending to serious business. Marissa carried a thick stack of documents, and Daniel, unlike usual, didn't glance around. He stared straight at my house, his eyes tight, like a man who had been waiting too long for this moment. They hadn't called. They hadn't scheduled a visit. This was no coincidence. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "There you are, Mom," Marissa said, her voice sweet as honey, but her eyes hard as steel. "We came a little early and to get the paperwork signed before the legal deadline. We don't want you stressed at the last minute," Daniel added, sounding as if he were reading from a script. I tilted my head. "What deadline?" Daniel glanced at Marissa. She placed the stack of documents neatly on the living room table and nudged it toward me. "Take a look. We just need you to sign where we've marked. It won't take more than 10 minutes. I pulled out a chair and sat, calm. "Before signing anything, I want to ask you something." Marissa kept smiling, though her lips twitched. "What do you want to ask?" "That night at the health check, you took me there. I never agreed to a cognitive exam. So who requested it?" Daniel blinked. A long, heavy blink. "Mom, you're remembering wrong." I looked straight at him. "I'm not forgetting." The air in the room froze. Marissa stopped smiling. I opened the drawer beside the armchair and placed each item on the table, one by one, steady and unhurried. The signature analysis, clearly stating that the signature on the document submitted to Maple Ridge County was not mine. The bank account verification, confirming that no one but me has the authority to modify or access any information. The revocable living trust documentation, the house, the land, the savings account, all transferred into the trust under my direct control. I looked at them plainly. "How do you explain these?" Daniel swallowed hard. Marissa went pale, though she tried to regain her composure. "Who's been filling your head with nonsense, Mom? This is a huge misunderstanding." I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on Daniel. For the first time since they arrived, he looked real. Not the man performing responsibility, not the man pretending to be in control. He looked like a lost child. Then he burst. "You don't understand, Mom." He slapped his hand on his thigh, his voice louder than usual. "I've lost nearly half my work hours. We're falling behind on the mortgage. Lila needs school fees. I was cornered." I stayed silent. Not because I didn't feel for him, but because I needed to hear everything. Daniel ran his fingers through his hair, as if trying to claw out the desperation in his mind. "You have a house, savings, everything. And I'm terrified of losing my home, terrified Marissa will leave, terrified I won't be able to care for my daughter. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like a failure." His voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability beneath all the calculations they had made. But vulnerability doesn't excuse betrayal. Marissa shot to her feet, yanking Daniel by the arm. "Don't let her twist this. We came here to get things done, not to spill our emotions." Daniel pulled his arm back but didn't dare look at me. I stood up, slow but steady. "Daniel, I am still your mother." I pointed toward the door. "But I'm not your victim." Marissa snapped the folder shut, her voice sharp as a blade. "Let's go." Daniel rose more slowly. As he stepped outside, he turned back to look at me, his eyes filled with regret and guilt, like he wanted to speak but couldn't. I didn't say another word. I simply stood there, watching the door close behind them. In that moment, I knew everything had truly begun, but not in the way they imagined. That night, after Daniel and Marissa left, the house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking, second by second. Quiet, but not heavy. It felt as if the house itself could finally breathe after weeks weighed down by tension I hadn't noticed. Lila stayed with me that weekend. She arrived with a tiny backpack and a teddy bear with worn ears. When I asked, "Which room do you want to sleep in?" she wrapped her arms around me and said, "With you." Her voice was soft and warm, like a blanket laid across my heart. That night I made hot cocoa, the kind my husband and I used to drink on winter nights. Lila blew bubbles into her cup, her lips pressed tight to keep from crying. I stroked her hair and said, "None of this is your fault. You saved me." She only nodded. But that slight nod held both relief and the quiet sadness of a child who knew too much about the complications of adults. In the days that followed, the messages began to arrive. First, a text from Daniel. "Mom, we're sorry. You misunderstood us." Then a long email from Marissa, full of circular phrases. "You shouldn't listen to outsiders. Family should trust each other." Then a handwritten letter from the in-laws, insisting they only wanted the best for me, that the whole situation had been blown out of proportion. I read each once, replied to none. News spread like wildfire across Maple Ridge. At church, I caught the looks, curiosity mixed with judgment. No one asked directly, but I heard the whispers when they thought I was out of earshot. That ward woman, heard she almost lost her house. Daniel's always been such a good guy. What happened? I wonder who's right in all this. I said nothing, no explanations, no defense. Truth, when it stands alone, has a way of shining by itself. One afternoon, after watering the garden behind the house, I found a gift basket by the front door. No knock, no note. Just a woven basket filled with apple pie. The kind I liked most, the kind Daniel always bought for my birthdays. I knew immediately who it was from. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and opened the card tied to it. Daniel's handwriting, familiar, slightly slanted to the right. "Mom, I'm sorry. I just wanted to take care of my family. You misunderstood us. Please forgive everything." I finished reading and sat still, not angry, just sad. A deep, slow sadness that seeped in like fog. He still didn't understand, didn't take responsibility, didn't face the truth that it wasn't a misunderstanding, but their own wrong choices. I placed the note into the wooden box where I kept things that needed to be remembered, but not carried in my heart. I left the apple pie untouched in the basket, not because I was angry, but because I knew this wasn't genuine remorse. It was merely an attempt to patch over the surface of a crack that had already reached the core. I set the basket in the corner of the kitchen and exhaled softly. And in that moment, I knew I had chosen correctly. Keeping distance wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. I love my son, but I cannot love the betrayal he took part in. And that windless afternoon, I felt more resolute than ever. The next morning was strangely clear and quiet. I stepped into the backyard where dew clung to the grass like tiny glass beads. The early sunlight lay over everything like a thin, delicate veil. I walked toward the apple tree in the corner, the first tree my husband and I planted when we moved into this house. Its trunk was rougher now, the branches broader and stronger. I placed my hand on its coarse bark, feeling the quiet but steady life pulsing beneath it. This apple tree had witnessed everything, the harsh winters, the blooming springs, the years when my family was intact, and the cracks that began to form after my husband passed. I stood there for a long time, letting the tangled thoughts in my heart settle with each slow breath. Perhaps family is the very thing that has the power to hurt us the most. Outsiders can make us sad, but only those we love can wound us to the core, because they reach the softest, most fragile places inside us. But then I remembered Lila, the 10-year-old girl with a heart brighter than any adult in the house. She didn't use fancy words, didn't calculate anything. She simply saw something wrong and stood on the side of what was right. If not for that little folded napkin she pressed into my hand that night, my life might have taken an entirely different turn. A child saved my whole world, simply because she had kindness. I smiled softly. So family isn't only those who can hurt us. Family is also those who keep us standing when we're about to fall. I've always believed that respecting the elderly isn't an obligation or a social formality. It's part of a decent way of living, a reminder that all of us will someday grow old, and all of us will need to be treated with humanity and kindness. A society that forgets this becomes a much colder place. As I stood under the apple tree, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. A message from Lila. "Grandma, I love you." Not long, not elaborate, but it made my eyes sting more than 100 adult apologies ever could. I sat down on the wooden bench in the yard, one hand still resting on the apple tree, and replied, "Because of you, I'm still standing." I set the phone aside and took a deep breath. The Maple Ridge sky stretched above me like a light blue blanket. For the first time in many long months, I felt truly at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I knew I had chosen the right people to trust and the right way to protect myself. Kindness isn't something grand. It's simply a small act at the right moment. But sometimes, that small act changes an entire life. That evening, I sat in the living room, the warm yellow light falling over old photographs on the wall. Everything that had happened these past weeks appeared more evident than ever, not to weigh me down, but to remind me of the path I'd walked through, a path I might have lost myself in if not for a small hand pulling me back. I want to leave anyone listening to my story with a straightforward message. Never underestimate the kindness, especially when it comes from a child. Adults often drown in worries and calculations, forgetting the most important thing: to face the truth and treat each other with decency. A sincere word, a brave action, no matter how small, can pull someone back from a life headed entirely the wrong way. And one more thing, never let anyone decide your life for you. When you surrender your choices, you surrender yourself. Age does not take away your worth. Loneliness does not make you weak. Only silence in the face of mistreatment can truly harm you. If this story prompts you to reflect on your own family, the people you love, or the quiet strength of kindness, you can follow the channel to hear more true stories. Stories that remind us that courage often comes from tiny things, and that those small things are what keep the world warm.